Have you ever wondered when witchcraft first emerged in England? The roots of English witchcraft can be traced back to the Dark Ages, a time steeped in mystery and superstition. Pagan traditions were deeply woven into the fabric of society, with rituals and beliefs that were an integral part of everyday life. However, as Christianity spread across the land, these pagan practices began to be viewed with suspicion and fear. They were seen as heretical, a threat to the established order, and eventually a crime punishable by law. The first laws against witchcraft came into effect in the early 16th century, marking a turning point in the perception and treatment of witchcraft. From the Dark Ages to the 16th century, witchcraft transformed from a common practice into a feared and persecuted one, forever changing the course of English history. It was during the Dark Ages that witchcraft first gained its notorious reputation in England. Did you know that the most infamous witch trials took place in the 16th and 17th centuries? In this era of uncertainty and superstition, society was gripped by a pervasive fear of the unknown, and witchcraft became a scapegoat for all manner of misfortunes. The trials were more than mere accusations. They were elaborate spectacles, often involving torturous methods to extract confessions from the accused. The so-called witches, largely women, were subjected to inhumane tests. These included the infamous water ordeal, where a suspected witch was thrown into a body of water. If she sank, she was innocent, but if she floated, she was deemed guilty of witchcraft. Such twisted logic, driven by fear and ignorance, led to thousands of executions. Many were hanged, others were burned at the stake, their lives brutally ended under the guise of justice. These trials were a dark chapter in England's history, with thousands falling victim to the witchcraft hysteria. Have you heard of the infamous Witchfinder General? His real name was Matthew Hopkins, a man whose career was steeped in fear and superstition. During the mid-17th century, Hopkins took it upon himself to rid England of witches, a mission that led to the execution of approximately 300 alleged witches. His methods for identifying these so-called witches were controversial, to say the least. Hopkins would often rely on the presence of the devil's mark, a physical sign that was believed to be left on a witch by the devil himself. This mark could be anything from a mole to a birthmark. Alongside this, Hopkins would use swimming tests, where the accused were thrown into water. If they floated, they were deemed guilty. This reign of terror lasted 2 years, from 1644 to 1646, but its effects reverberated throughout history. Hopkins' reign of terror left a lasting mark on the history of English witchcraft. When did the era of witch trials come to an end in England? The late 17th century marked a significant shift in the public sentiment towards witch trials. A growing skepticism over the legitimacy of these trials began to permeate society, as people started questioning the validity of the evidence used against the accused. This skepticism was mirrored in the courts, with judges becoming increasingly reluctant to convict on the shaky grounds of spectral evidence and confessions extracted through torture. As a result, the number of convictions dropped dramatically. In 1684, the last execution for witchcraft occurred, signaling the end of an era dominated by fear and superstition. Just a few years later, in 1689, the English law against witchcraft was repealed, driven by the changing public sentiment. This marked a pivotal moment in English history, where reason began to hold sway over superstition. By the end of the 17th century, the age of witch trials had finally come to a close. What does modern witchcraft look like in England? As we step into the 20th century, England witnesses a revival of witchcraft, fueled by a newfound interest in the old ways and a quest for spiritual connection to nature. The rise of Wicca, a nature-based religion founded by Gerald Gardner in the mid-20th century, sees a surge in the number of self-identified witches. Unlike the witches of yesteryears who lived in fear, today's witches practice openly, their craft recognized as a legitimate religion. This shift reflects an enlightened society that values diversity and freedom of belief. Today, witchcraft is protected under English law, ensuring the rights and freedom of its practitioners. From the ancient to the modern, witchcraft has evolved significantly. The witches of today are no longer the feared and persecuted figures of the past, but are accepted individuals practicing their faith freely. Today, witchcraft in England has come full circle, from feared and persecuted to accepted and protected.